So I'm actually going to start kicking off just to sort of start doing the welcomes and go through the bios, and then we can have a nice, great conversation. So welcome to the John Schofield Trust Masterclass on Programme Editing. It could be a role that some of you see as your dream role. It clearly involves a clear head and managing lots of different resources. But it also means being willing to take flack about some of the decisions that you make as you set the news agenda. Now, we're super lucky today as we've got some of the best editors in the business here to impart their wisdom. So I'm just going to go through and then we'll get talking. So we have Laura Holgate. She has recently been made output editor at ITV News. Laura, you started as an ITN trainee before becoming an output producer and then a programme editor 11 years ago. So you've worked on the news at 10 and that's when it won the RTS Programme of the Year, was nominated for a BAFTA. You've edited many special programmes from breaking news to open enders. And quite recently, you edited the overnight referendum programme in 2016, becoming the first broadcaster to call the result. And you edited Prince Philip's funeral programme, so quite high profile events. We've got Richard Frediani, who's the editor of BBC Breakfast. Now, he's been a journalist for more than 30 years with experience in network, regional, local TV and radio, so all over the shop. And Richard, you moved into TV at ITN in 1998, so a while ago, and you've worked in the field in Iraq, Northern Ireland and the US as a news editor. You've worked, it seems like everywhere. You've won BAFTAs for coverage of the Morecambe Bay Cochrane tragedy, RTS Nations and Regions programmes, and you became in charge of the ITV Evening News. You've worked on the news at 10, and you've managed special programmes on pretty significant general elections, including the 2015 and 2017 ones, the Scottish referendum, and the Brexit vote in 2016. Now, you came to BBC Breakfast in late 2019, and in 18 months, the programme has won significant praise for coverage of many, many different stories, including the Marcus Rashford Free Schools meal story. Now, we've also got from BBC, Debbie Ramsay. Now, you're the outgoing head of journalism for youth programmes, and you're the editor of BBC Radio 1 and 1 Extra Newsbeat. You've got a new job as executive editor in News Commissioning UK, so your experience, again, is incredibly varied. Now, in fact, we met as I started my BBC traineeship at Newsbeat, so you've been around for a while too, and you're a senior leader with more than a decade's experience working on youth programmes, running a team of journalists at Newsbeat. You've delivered stories across many platforms, including Radio 1, 1 Extra, and the iPlayer aimed at 16 to 24-year-olds. You're also an advisor to the Director General Senior Executive Group and the BBC News Group Board, and you also are a trustee for the Prison Radio Association Board of Trustees. Brilliant. And you started in commercial radio and local papers, so again, all through the ranks. And John Ryley, now you're the head of Sky News when you've been there since 2006. You've worked for the BBC and ITN. You started as a graduate trainee, so I'm sure a lot of our trainees are going to be pleased to hear that. And you started at the BBC News in 1989. You then went on to edit all of ITV News's programmes before joining Sky in 1995. Now, you've worked on pretty much everything, all of the major domestic and international stories of the past 35 years. Is there an award you haven't won? So, you know, BAFTAs, pretty much everything. You launched a successful campaign for Britain's first live televised leaders debate in the 2010 UK general election. And this year, you were given the Royal Television Society's Outstanding Contribution Award. You're also a board member of the National Council for the Training of Journalists. So again, we're super pleased to have all of you here with your extensive experience. Just to remind everybody that if you've got any questions for our esteemed panel here, please put them into the Q&A and we will take them accordingly tonight. As you can see, it's a goldmine of knowledge. We're very, very lucky that all of the speakers today have offered their valuable time for free. Now, the John Schofield Trust, which works to make this industry very inclusive, is a very small charity, and we run these masterclasses for free too. But since we're such a small charity, we would ask that you consider donating. Some people give £20, some people give £5. Whatever you can afford is all that we're asking for. A QR code is appearing on your screen. Please scan it with the phone or a QR code reader and consider donating. Or you can text Schofield to 70085. Okay, so on to matters at hand. Now, I always think it's really important to start with the basics. So I'm going to ask all of you, how did you get into programme editing? Like, why not stay in reporting? And what is it? What do you actually do? So, Richard, I'm going to go with you first. What do you do?
Sometimes my team asks me that. What do I do? Your job is to bring together, harness the talents of your team, from the on-screen presenters through the reporting team through to the creative brains and planning teams behind what puts the programme together. You are there as, in some respects, the ringmaster to try and help, support, guide those teams to produce as best a programme you can on any given day. And there are days, and I suspect we're all in this position, where you walk away after a programme, although I suspect in John's case that never stops, but in my case, whether it's a 3.25 hour programme or a half-hour bulletin, etc., you walk away and reflect on either a job well done or something you can improve on. But, you know, that's where the experience comes day in, day out. You learn lessons from things that you've done, but always remember that when that program's been put to bed, when that program is over, that is a program done and you're already on to the next one. So, you know, I think the job is there to basically lead, support, manage, drive, be the creative force behind, you know, a team on and off screen.
Laura, do you agree? Or is there anything that you sort of think, hold on a minute, Richard, are you sure about that?
I agree with everything Richard says. No, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, you're sort of, yeah, like Richard said, like the, you know, the director really of this whole sort of huge operation, and everything that goes in it, you know, is almost like your responsibility to channel that and make sure what goes out on there looks good. Someone described it to me once as in the morning you're given this like a la carte menu of things to choose what you can put in your program that night, and you get to pick and choose which one you want, and hopefully that's the sort of best dining experience you can have, for want of an awful analogy. Yeah, look, I mean, it's a great job. I love it. It's the best job I've ever done, and you know, it's hugely creative, hugely rewarding. The highs are high and the lows are low, and like Richard says, you go home every night and you can't regret what you've done, that what you can regret, but you've got to keep thinking about your next show. You can't sort of dwell on it. You're only as good as your last show, I think, is what we sort of say in the business.
And Debbie, is that your experience too? Or?
Yeah, Laura and Richard have summed it up really well. And I think for me, it really is about that team and empowering that team and encouraging that team and motivating that team and harnessing that creativity of a morning. You can have the wildest ideas come out, or sometimes hardly any at all. And it's about motivating people and dealing with that and producing the best product possible for the audience on many platforms.
John, what have you got for that?
Yeah, I'd agree with everything that's been said. I liken it a bit to being a conductor of an orchestra, and either you're a sort of classical conductor and you stick to the score, or you can be a bit of a jazz conductor and you go off the score, and that's when it gets quite exciting. And I suppose I'd liken terrestrial program editing, which I did a lot of at ITV News, was like being a classical conductor. You had, you know, whether it be 15 minutes at 5:40 or whatever it was, 26.5 minutes at 10 o'clock, and you had to stick to that, and you went in with your running order and you pretty much stuck with it. Or somewhere like Sky News or the BBC News Channel or CNN, you're a jazz conductor. You're having to change the tempo and the rhythm and where you're heading with your music, with your program the whole time. And I suppose the other thing I said, as Debbie's just mentioned, it is about the audience, and you know, different programs have different audiences, and that's something one should always remember. What works at 10 o'clock at night on the evening won't necessarily hit home at 1 o'clock or 12:30 in the afternoon. I think that's quite a sort of a vector that some people don't always take into account. You know, what are you actually, who are you talking to, and what message do you want to get across from your journalism?
Just picking up on that, actually, I mean, how do you decide what to cover and what to leave out? Like, you know, if you're the ringmaster or if you're the conductor, how do you decide these are the ingredients that I need to include? So, Laura, I'll go with you first. You know, what is it that you think, yes, that's definitely going to be a story, and what is it like, you must be joking?
It completely depends on the day and what stories are around on that day. And it's very hard, I think, to put your finger on actually what makes a good story and what doesn't. And that, you know, that's why we're all in this game. I think, you know, it's very different from day to day. And I think that's where we have our editorial meetings, where we go through different stories and we talk about them and how we do them and what we put in them and who would report on them. And I think that's where we have this sort of a thorough kind of interrogation of a story, and then we work out whether it feels right or not. I'm quite an instinctive program editor. So for me, when I'm working on a program, I know the program well, and then it feels instinctively right. I'm not the sort of program editor who's like, well, this is the most important story, so this goes at the top and we do it like that. I'm a bit more, well, I like to think I'm a bit more instinctive than that. So knowing your program well, knowing the sort of stories that might work for your audience, as John says, then makes it easier to and almost natural to choose which stories go in your own in order and why.
And Debbie, you've been working a lot with youth audiences over the years, so clearly you've built up that instinct there, surely. So how do you decide this is it? Because a lot of people want the young audience right now, even if they're not working in youth audiences.
I guess it's just about remembering every time you're discussing the story, remembering the audience's point of view, because I think you can very easily get caught up into a certain way of thinking that's kind of personal to you, especially as a team, and a team that works really well together. You kind of know how each other feels about certain things, but it's really kind of challenging yourself to what would the audience say about this? What do I want them to feel? Why are they interested? Why does this appeal to, I don't know, a 22-year-old plumber in Scarborough? Why is it of interest to them? And if it's not of interest to them, how can I make it of interest to them? Because we have a public service remit as well. So there are those sort of stories you tackle as well. And then when you get it right and it just flies, the audience lets you know. And that's a really great feeling when there's a program going out that literally just hits that sweet spot, and the texts fly in and the tweets fly in, and yeah, it's you can tell, especially on a younger audience, if it's really hit the sweet spot if they bother to text in, because they don't text in that much very often unless it's really hit them.
And Richard, how about you? Like, how do you think, okay, this is definitely a breakfast thing, or is it? And also the other thing I wanted to check in with you as well is, how hierarchical are your meetings? Can anyone come in and be like, let's talk about the audience, or this is what we think is a good idea? So if one of our trainees, for example, came in and they aren't at the high end of the pecking order, as it were, how would we know that, their ideas would be taken forward?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things to reflect on in there. So in terms of, you have people from all backgrounds, all viewpoints, all ranges of experience, from trainees to very experienced journalists in meetings. I mean, funnily enough, one of the challenges has been in a post-pandemic world where most of those meetings have been sort of via Zoom rather than sort of the traditional huddled in an office, has been sort of encouraging people to engage and discuss and debate when you haven't got that sort of personal, interpersonal space and conversations that you have. But I'm just picking up on a point that John made, and I wonder if this might help people who are watching. When John was talking about sort of what might work at one time of the day might not work at another. One of the things we often think about, or we put quite key to what we're doing is, I think of breakfast as the one point of the day where the audience has not tuned into anything. The vast majority of people watching breakfast or listening to a breakfast output on the radio or even online they've been probably asleep for 6, 7, 8 hours overnight. So actually they're hungry for information, and that information can be a range of different things, from what's the weather going to be like that day to maybe some sports news or something that they've seen on social media when they've first woken up and picked up their phone and it's a breaking story that's happened every night. But at the same time, they're having a different relationship with the television, if they choose to watch television, than they would maybe at 10 o'clock at night, because often in the morning they're doing 3 or 4 different things. They're getting dressed, they're going and having a shower, they're having their breakfast. So they might be watching in the broadest sense for longer, but they're doing other things, where maybe at 10 o'clock at night on the program that Laura and I used to work on, it may be the last thing you're watching before you decide to go to bed, and you're having a very close one-on-one relationship. So thinking about how you do television at breakfast time, in terms of, for me, the challenge is, how am I going to stop, even if it's for a few minutes, somebody doing their routine? My challenge to my team is, let's create something every day that makes somebody late for the bus, that makes somebody late for the tram. you know, or even nowadays in a post-pandemic world, late to go down to the room where they're working from home for, because I want to disrupt their routine because they switched off their hairdryer for 5 minutes because of a compelling interview or a great OB or a moment of television that connects with them. And that's very different to if you're doing a program much later on in the day.
And to picking up on that, I mean, I come from a more digital world, and we talk about the thumb stopper, as it were, you know, what's going to make you stop scrolling. But with John, with your extensive experience, is there anything that makes, you know, what is the perfect story? Is there anything you're still sort of holding out on?
So I'm very old, so I'm going to make a very old-fashioned point. Television is a visual medium. Radio is audio, oral, and obviously print is the word. And I think for me, always what sort of I'm looking out for as a programmator, when I was a programmator, is something that is visually stunning and something that really grabs you pictorially. And so picture stories, I always think, you know, work really well on the television. That sounds trite, but I feel that at times we get far too carried away with experts and talking heads, and television is a visual medium. And also it has huge opportunities for storytelling in terms of, as Laura mentioned, about graphics and creativity. I think it's easy to forget that television is a visual medium, and the power of a picture, whether it be a human or extraordinary vista, power of pictures is really stunning. As humans, as audiences, we relate to that hugely. And a more subtle, nuanced point, I think, is actually we live in an age where the power of the still is very strong as well. And that really lends itself, I think, to the digital world. So I'm always really excited when there's a big picture story. So I think that's sort of it's a great opportunity for a programmator, and it is something that will appeal to the human mind as well, to our audiences.
Can I just actually pick up on that? So I come from a user-generated content background. So I work in news gathering in BBC, and clearly, you know, we have people who are taking pictures when the correspondents are there. Now, sometimes the images aren't great because they're there and they're in the moment and they're just picking stuff up. How do you deal with that sort of content that's coming in? Because in this climate, we've been getting a lot more in of UGC material, of eyewitness media material, and it can be good pictures, but rough, as it were. You know, does it matter if it's rough content as long as it?
I think that's a very interesting point. I think actually the pandemic has changed that. I mean, I can only really speak for Sky News, I guess, but we have done a lot more interviewees down, you know, technology like this, the idea of sending a crew off 150 miles east, south, north or west to interview someone or whatever, is, I think, long gone. And the viewer, the audiences on television are much happier now with, they're comfortable with a slightly grainy image. And I also feel that it sort of comes to what's the news point of the story. If it's a really good news story, then you go with whatever ragged picture you've got. And you just have to make that decision. That's a pragmatic decision taken minute by minute, hour by hour by programmators of whether or not this is a good picture to illustrate the story. There is a plethora of picture coming in these days. I mean, huge amounts. And not all of it gets looked at, but that's sort of, there's only so many hours in the day.
And of course, just to pick up on John's point, you know, and this is no different now to a decade ago when sort of, you know, user-generated content started to take off, which is, of course, you know, there are many examples of people being caught out by rushing to judgment. So some great footage is what it purports to be. And, you know, there are plenty of times where you see footage doing the rounds, which actually is nothing to do with, particularly on a serious story, a breaking story that you know, it isn't what it says, and you can get burnt by that. But, you know, making that judgment is absolutely right. And I think John's other point about the audience tolerance about systems like this, but actually, you know, systems that are now far better quality than they were even a couple of years ago, you know, is not just one about editorial. I think in reality it's also a cost one as well. You know, you make some decisions now, and I think even in a world where we'll go back to something near normality, one of the discussions you'll have now that you maybe wouldn't have had 18 months ago is, do we send a camera to that, or do we do it by Zoom or Teams or whatever system that you want to use? Because, you know, what's the value you're going to get out of it? Because in reality, the value of the cost of that camera you would have sent, you maybe want to reinvest into something else.
I would say certainly for younger audiences as well, it's been a real advantage that everybody can do filming themselves. You know, smartphones are so good these days. There is quite a lot of time where we have a contributor and we get them to take the photo or self-film themselves, you know, talking to the camera and sending us the raw, and we can do all sorts with it. So it's really opened up that field in terms of, you don't have to have a really swanky camera that's largish, professional, and, you know, lit properly by the correct lighting, etc., to actually tell a story and get a story across. So it's made it a bit more accessible. If you are the sort of person who wants to tell a story but you don't have much resource for traveling, you can get your contributors to help you with that.
I think it's good because we can just have a mix now, can't we, in our programmes? We can have those beautifully filmed and produced and created and crafted films, which we, you know, will love from, you know, both home and abroad. And we can also, you know, do things quite quickly with, you know, UGC content, Twitter stills, you know, depending on what the story is, and Skype interviews, you know. And I think our viewer is accepting of that whole wide range in a half-hour programme or a 2-hour programme. It's just made everything much more diverse in a way, I guess, in terms of our range of content.
Now, one of the criticisms that does come up about broadcast news over the years is that it takes far too much of its agenda from the newspapers and the Today programme. Is that still the case?
I don't buy that anymore.
No.
It was, when I worked on News at 10 and the BBC 9 o'clock news, you know, 40 years ago, yeah, I think that was a fair criticism. It's just modern newsrooms aren't like that anymore. The Sky newsroom isn't like that. I don't believe the BBC breakfast show or the ITV news. Just the world's moved on considerably, partly because it reflects a lot of people today working in television haven't worked in newspapers, and news is happening too fast. The newspapers are out of date. So I feel quite strongly about that. I just don't buy that.
Yeah, John's 100% right. Look, I mean, the reality is this: we all feed off each other. You know, if somebody's got a good story, it doesn't matter whether it's newspaper, one of your broadcast rivals, radio outlet, or whatever. If it's a good story, you admit it's a good story, maybe sometimes through gritted teeth, and you go off and chase it. You know, what we all want, you know, are exclusives and original content. I mean, you know, I can sit here and praise John for Sky's Afghan coverage yesterday. I can praise my old colleagues at ITV News for the brilliant work they've been doing on housing conditions and investigations into Amazon, right? And see all those stories picked up, whether they're quotes, images, full articles on them, or agenda setting, you know, coverage, you know, in papers every day. Look, you know, there's an endless battle that's gone on since time immemorial between broadcasters and newspapers, and actually the reality is we're all in the battle together, and we'll tip our hat to somebody who's got a fantastic exclusive and equally follow it up as well.
And I think we all invest much more now in distinctive journalism. I think, you know, across the board we all want to have our own stories, we all want to have our own exclusives, like Freddie says, and there's much more of an investment in that, I think, than perhaps there ever has been before.
Debbie, anything to add?
I guess it's just, I just think it is really great that that kind of competition now is healthier, and also, you know, to what Laura said, it's about those different stories. We all want our own exclusive, so that opens it up, because you want to hear more stories from different parts of the audience. You know, as different as you can get, because there's no point in all of us telling the same stories. And then there's nothing to be envious of, I would say.
Well, picking up on that, I'll go ahead, John, and then I'm going to pick up on that.
No, I think that's exactly right. We want to have different stories, absolutely. Yeah, bit of a no-brainer really now.
Brilliant. So
we've all got teams across the country, like, you know, ITV News, we have a, you know, network of regional of TV stations who, you know, all feed into our planning system. So we get stories from across there as well. And you know, so we're really striving to have our, you know, there's certain stories which you have to cover, which are on the agenda, which everyone has to cover, and that's just it. And there's others which we all try and do ourselves differently. So, and, you know, they come through a variety of different sources within each newsroom.
So I'm just going to remind people that if you've got any questions, bear in mind this is gold standard caliber people, do put them into the Q&A. And just again, picking up on that. So there was actually a piece in The Spectator, I think last week, where Victoria Newton, who's editor-in-chief of The Sun, was talking about the paper's Matt Hancock scoop and the process that paper played in getting the story to air. So she states, and I quote, "Excruciatingly for the BBC, by 9 a.m, it still hadn't been able to work out how to cover the story. Was it a sex scandal or a political expose? Such are the chilling effects of privacy laws, particularly to the BBC, which has been burned before. At first, the story the BBC picked up from that day's Sun was about racing pigeons mysteriously going missing. Pretty soon after, our front page was on every news bulletin in Britain. It drove record levels of page views on our website, and it was trending on Twitter." So what happened there? Because it wasn't just the BBC that waited, considering that this was the Sun scoop and not your own, and, you know, there was significant interest in it. What factors would all of you have had to consider before getting it out on air?
I guess you know, with all big stories, you don't just rush to copy your competitors. You do have to do your own research, your own verification, and your own decision on what tone you want to take and what approach you want to take to the story. And sometimes that can take longer than other times.
I think that's bang on. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I was on holiday when it broke, but you have to verify the story. You shouldn't just lift the story out of the paper, and you need to check whether it's true or not. I mean, I still, in an old-fashioned way, believe broadcasting is about the truth. And there would have been a process of verification going on in all our different newsrooms to check it out and establish the facts. And that can.
Yeah, that's what our reputations are built on at the end of the day. You know, we've got to be accurate. It's not just about being first. And I think that's one of our sort of, you know, things at ITV is, you know, we don't want to be first, we want to be accurate. And I think definitely in a story of that kind, if you just rush that picture to air and you've had no sort of background on it, you don't understand exactly what's happened, you've not done the due diligence on it, then I think you know, that's not journalism, is it?
I also think there's a factor in the accuracy in that Spectator article, because I'm fairly confident in saying the Today programme put it to a government minister who was on at 8:10 about the Matt Hancock story, and it was broadcast live on breakfast at 8:30 that morning. So to say it wasn't anywhere on the BBC by 9 o'clock in the morning is factually inaccurate. But actually, you know, what everybody sort of said, you check out every story. I go back to what I just said about whether it's UGC content or something from one of your rivals. You know, the first thing you have to do is check out whether it's a story. You know, what is the story? What exactly are we saying about the story? So in that case, was it just a story about, you know, a relationship, an office relationship, or was it something more than that? You know, did it happen as the Sun says? You know, I mean, look, you know, sometimes facts aren't as they appear, and you have to do all that checking first, because if you put it out and just lift it and get it wrong, then you are in as much trouble as those who published the first one. It was a brilliant scoop, but that doesn't mean you put it out the moment that you get their front page.
But then what are all of you and I guess your organisations doing around the fact that there's a lot of discourse about mainstream media and not believing in the news, and you know, people thinking that, you know, they've got to be in the fringes? Like, how do you establish trust in the news nowadays?
Get your facts right.
Well,
sorry,
you go on, Richard.
No, well, it's very simple. You establish trust by making sure your facts are right. We all make mistakes, don't get me wrong, you know, and you stick your hand up when you've made an honest mistake. But trust is gained or garnered by getting your facts right. Go on, John.
I just echo that completely. I mean, what you've seen through the pandemic, a time of extraordinary national crisis, is actually the mainstream media has done very well. Our numbers, our audiences have increased because people trust us to get the facts right. And when broadcast news starts getting facts wrong, that's dangerous. And it's been a great opportunity for all the main broadcast news organisations in Britain to really demonstrate that actually British television news and British broadcast news is in a pretty good place, because we really do take the pursuit of truth very seriously.
You know, going back to what we do on a day-to-day basis as programme editors, you know, one of the main roles that we do is actually going through every package, checking everything, making sure it's correct, making sure our correspondents haven't made any mistakes, making sure our graphics have been properly sourced and gone through. And that's a big role of being, you know, these are big issues we're talking about, but actually as a programme editor on a day-to-day basis, that's what you're doing.
I think that even though, you know, in this kind of social media age and digital age, that you can find lots of discourse and lots of people who say they don't agree or don't believe the mainstream media. But when it comes down to it, on those stories that you really want to know the truth on, you'll still switch on the BBC, you'll still switch on ITV, you'll still switch on Sky, rather than believe your YouTube video. You might watch your YouTube video and think, oh yeah, they might have a point, but you'll still go to those broadcasters to see what they're saying, and you're still more likely to believe what they're saying in some senses.
And that's why, sorry Debbie, that's why during COVID we've seen our audiences increase hugely, because people wanted to find out what was going on and they trusted us. So, you know, like Debbie says, there'll always be people who go to YouTube and not believe it. But I think that, you know, the proof's in the pudding, and our audiences went up, you know, by a huge amount for public service broadcasting, which was telling the truth about what, you know, what was going on and giving an accurate, you know, perception of what was happening in the world at any given day. And you know, during the crisis of the pandemic, we saw that, you know, more than ever, they turned to us.
And what do you think about, so we don't have anyone here at the moment, but GB News and its efforts for what it says it's going to be more in touch with the audience and reach people who feel that you know, TV journalism doesn't reach them at the moment. Like, how are you all reacting to this new puppy on the field, as it were?
So I think...
Go on, John.
Go ahead, John.
Hey, look, I mean, good luck to GB News. You know, I believe passionately in diversity and plurality. They're trying something different. It's not what we do at Sky News. They're very focused on opinions, but I wish them the very best of luck. And they're trying something different, and innovation, I always feel should be encouraged. But it's not what we are about at Sky News, and I don't think it's what the BBC is about or ITV News. But you know, that good luck to them.
Yeah, plurality of views, plurality of outputs is hugely important, and the viewers will make a choice based on what they see, you know, both on GB News and across other platforms and media, about what they follow, what they choose to watch, what they choose to trust, you know, based on what they see.
Debbie, anything to add?
No, I think it's been covered, really. John made the point I was going to, so yeah.
Laura, any further points?
No, I agree. You know, good luck to them. It's a, you know, fine. Get on with it.
Okay.
We do what we do, and they can do what they do.
So let's come to the role that you guys play. Like, the Trust has a significant focus on inclusivity, but each of you, like in terms of your organisations and your teams, how are you actually doing on diversity? Like, how many non-white people do you have in senior positions on your team? How many disabled staff do you have? What are you actually doing? So Debbie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I kind of think it's the buzzword for a lot of people at the minute, but certainly for my team, I didn't really need anybody to give me targets to build an inclusive team. So for the past 5 years I've been editor, our team has always had a great range of people from all different walks of life, all different racial backgrounds, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, because I think that's really important as well, which we don't measure very often, and also abilities and sexualities. And we've just always had a mix, because that variety of opinion is what keeps me as an editor interested. So in some ways, I've selfishly built my team to be very diverse and as such very inclusive. So, you know, I don't really, when people say, oh, well, are you worried about your targets or what do you do? It's kind of second nature to us at Radio 1 and 1 Extra and at Newsbeat. We're a very inclusive team, and a very diverse team. Range of ages is what I'm trying to say, you know, in terms of, I think people think, oh, you know, it's just young people working at Newsbeat, but we've got a range of ages from 19 right up to 50 something, and it works. That those different voices learning from each other, and that different range of experience and that life experience, it just works and makes our content so much more accessible for the audience and so much better for the audience as well. And
Richard, is that the case at breakfast as well?
Yeah, look, Debbie and I are on the same playing field because we're on the same broadcaster, and you know, Debbie's right in the sense that the targets aren't necessarily there are within the BBC. There's a thing called 50-20-12, which is, you know, trying to make 50% of your workforce split between men and women, 20% are from a ethnically diverse background, 12 are from a, you know, some sort of disabled background. The important, but for me, the importance, and it sort of picks up on the point Debbie was making, was the more diverse your team is, the more diversity of background your team is, whether that's talking about their ethnicity or their socioeconomic background or their age profile or whatever, the more diversity of thought that will go into the ideas and the suggestions that you will knock around in those team meetings that we talked about earlier on. That's what's crucial about what we're all trying to achieve. And things like the Schofield Trust and training schemes that the BBC and ITV and Sky and others run are really important in bringing people through from backgrounds that maybe are less traditional than the normal recruiting grounds.
And Laura, is that the case with you as well in terms of your organisation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't got the exact figures on me, but I think, you know, more than 20% of our staff, both off screen and on screen, are from an ethnic minority background. You know, I think we all recognise that more can be done and at senior levels, and we're targeting that through the senior leadership team. I think in terms of the environment, like Debbie and Freddie have said, I mean, I would say this, I do feel it's quite an inclusive environment. You know, we're always sort of described as a family, you know, cringely, but you know, we're always working to do more. In terms of our sort of representation on air, we do have targets. We every show, after every show in the debrief, we have an assessment of a balance of voices, and then that forms part of the debrief, those figures. And you know, if they don't sort of stack up that day, then there's sort of an interrogation into why not. And then those figures are then monitored. We also have like internal and external groups who feed back to us on a sort of monthly basis on what we could be doing and what we could be doing better. I think, you know, we've worked on sort of language guides. We've done workshop media training for women who, you know, often didn't want to speak up or would let their male counterparts speak up. We've done a lot of work on that as well. But and I think a part of it as well on air is in who your workforce is made up of, as Freddie rightly said. But also in sort of when you're thinking about stories, if you're doing sort of a story such as like a wedding planning business, you don't necessarily go for a heterosexual couple who are getting married. You know, it's sort of just showing different ways of telling those stories and being representative, you know, throughout. So it's something we're always working on and trying our hardest to be representative, I guess, both off screen and on screen.
And John, I mean, you've been around for a while, respectfully, but how has it changed in that time, and where's it heading towards in terms of being more inclusive and more, I guess, diverse?
Well, I think, and I feel quite strongly about this, it sort of echoes what Laura and Richard both said, is I think in the past there was perhaps too much of a focus on-screen diversity and having Black or Asian correspondent reporters. And for my money, actually, is you need to have people from ethnically diverse backgrounds doing the off-screen jobs, because that's where the power is, whether it be a program editor or a producer or a news editor or a director, because that's where the power in television lies, is the off-screen decision takers. And I think there has been a shift in my time in television to recognise that, and it's something I feel very strongly about at Sky News. Being Sky and being part of Sky, we measure everything and have done for a very long time. And every morning we know exactly the mix of our contributors in our 10 o'clock show. And we keep a very close eye on that all the time. And Sky has set some very decent targets. But the need to have senior decision takers from ethnically diverse backgrounds is really important for all the reasons we've discussed over the last 40 minutes, because it leads to more diverse, pluralistic output.
Okay, and John, I think you actually touched upon this, so it'd be great to hear about the others. We're starting to get audience questions in, and we've got one from Lauren McGann. I apologise if I've pronounced that wrong. And she had asked, how difficult do you find it to have stories which centre on the voices of the communities they're about, while not just using certain presenters to comment on these stories? For example, always using reporters of colour for stories on racism. So, John, you talked about, measuring and being aware of that, and Laura, you touched upon that as well. Is that something that all of you do? Is that something that is something that you will consider in terms of who's covering what story and why? Richard?
Oh, sorry, you want to start with me? Sorry, yeah, I think. Listen, hearing from real people in the community is absolutely central to not just what I will try and do at breakfast, but my time at ITV it was no different. The most authentic voices you can get are people who've lived the experience of the story that you're trying to communicate, and doing that is a real challenge. And getting people to report on that or engaging that, whether that's as a live guest, whether that's in a package, or whether that's putting a reporter on a location to tell that story for you, will depend on what the story is, depend on what the issue is. But hearing that lived experience is a really, really crucial bit to what we will try and do every single day.
And I think it is a kind of challenge to how far we go in terms of how far we are along the road in terms of having all reporters report on all issues, because that's something that we do a lot of at Newsbeat. You will be expected to cover the politics story, or you might be doing the sport, or you might be doing the entertainment story, or you might be doing a health story. But we've had some really interesting discussions on the team about whether, especially on stories, about race, whether a reporter who isn't of that background, racial background, can or should cover that story. And it is a discussion and a learning process. But if everybody is starting to get more comfortable with people who are different to them, from different backgrounds and of different disabilities, and they understand the way people think and understand that kind of diversity of thought and acceptance and inclusion is learning from other people's experience, then on some stories there would be no reason why somebody who was white couldn't cover a racism story. But there are times when that lived experience just enhances the coverage of a story if a reporter has something extra they can bring to the table. But that doesn't mean that nobody else can cover the story.
Okay. And then I've got one more question here from Nabiha Parker, who says, thank you for all sparing time this evening. Have any of you ever chosen not to run a particular story or decided not to lead the programme on a story and then later questioned that decision? So you then realised the story was potentially bigger than you initially thought, or you saw that the audience was more interested after you had broadcast your initial...
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I used to do that a lot. Yeah. I mean, most famously, I got spectacularly wrong, and it's a date that's burnt into my mind. You have to be of a certain age to sort of get it. So it was the 25th of January, 1995, and Manchester United were playing Crystal Palace at home. And at about 9:05, a footballer called Eric Cantona, who wore the number 7 shirt for Man U, it's a big, very strong French guy, and was part of Ferguson's very successful squad of those years. He was sent off, and as he was going off, he kung fu kicked a Crystal Palace fan called Matthew Simmons. And it was all happened on telly. You know, I've just said earlier, television is a visual medium. I did not lead on it. It was a very bad mistake not to have led on it with hindsight. It dominated everything for about a week. And I got a severe telling off for not leading it. Actually, I ran it as soon as the package was ready, which was story 3. But to be honest, I hadn't planned to lead on it. But and I learned a lot from that experience. So yeah, that happens all the time. These things are judgment calls. And you know, I think Laura called herself an instinctive program editor. I think that's absolutely right. And you won't get everything right. You will make mistakes. So I certainly made a mistake on January the 25th, 1995. Yeah.
And the good thing is sometimes as an editor, you get to rectify that, you know, and take it from a different angle or take it from a bit later in the story. But, you know, you can't be perfect.
There's no science to program editing. There's no magic formula that says if this and this comes together, then it equals story 1, 2, or 3. You know, John refers to Laura's reference to being instinctive. Some of it comes from deep down in your belly that you sort of think that's the story that will best connect with our audience. And also in reality, and we talked about it much earlier in this session, that you know, different things will work for different audiences. You know, go back to when we were just talking about the papers earlier on. Some days you can look at the front page of every single paper and it's the same story. Or some mornings I can look at what Sky are leading on, what G&B are leading on. I'll listen to what the Today programme or 5 Live. And some days we'll all go for the same thing. And some days we'll go for wildly different stories. And that is partly based on who we think we are broadcasting to, who our research, who our information, who our gut feeling tells us. And some of it is a little bit of instinctiveness, and it happens every so often that you think, I think I'm onto a cracker of a story here, and I'm just waiting for everybody else to play catch up.
I mean, you know, you're not on your own. I mean, that's the thing, is like, you know, I guess the decision rests with you, but there's a whole load of people around you can ask and speak about, you know. And like there's loads of times in the newsroom where like Freddie and I would be working together and someone like really old died and I never heard of them. And Freddie would like come running out and go, oh my God, it's Elise. And I'm like, who is it? Frantically Googling. You know, just one example, but you know, that we're with people all the time that you can talk about and chat to and say, is this right? Do you think this is the lead? Is that the lead? Am I wrong in doing that? Ultimately, it's your decision. But you know, there's enough people around you to help guide you, and like we were saying, if your newsroom is like truly representative, then you know, if that is the lead story, then that will come across, and you'll realise that sooner, hopefully, rather than later.
Brilliant.
And that's one of the things I've missed over the last 16 months, the noise of a newsroom. A newsroom should be noisy because you should be talking to each other and bouncing ideas off each other. And as Laura says, saying, well, does this sound quite right? Or does this feel like the right lead? Or, you know, and I've missed that.
Me too.
So we're coming closer to the end, so I did actually want to ask you about you know, there's major plans to shake up the British broadcasting landscape, including talks about the sale of Channel 4. So for you all, what does the future hold for news broadcasting and editing and the jobs that you've been doing?
I think it's a golden age for journalism. It really is. I mean, the technology that exists now, the means of telling stories, is so much greater than it was 40 years ago. We have the extraordinary ways we can create, use pictures, the speed at which we can respond to stories, and big things are happening around the globe. It's a time of extraordinary uncertainty, and audiences want to try and understand more what's going on around them. I think it's a fantastic time to be in journalism. It's a real golden age.
It's a job that's forever developing, and that we are forever learning. I mean, I think we're all old enough to remember an era that was certainly pre-social media, certainly in terms of editing systems on tape and quarter-inch spools when it was back to radio. You communicated with audiences in a different way. And, what the landscape will be like in another 20 to 30 years' time, well, if any of us had the answer to that, we'd actually be investing in it and be billionaires by that time. I think the most important thing I would say to anybody who's coming through the industry is embrace change, because that change often has to reflect how you communicate and get your information across to an audience. Debbie referenced, digital technology. Dhruti, you've talked about it too. The understanding that you will continue to need to both use different platforms to communicate with your audience, as well as use different methods to gather that news and communicate that news, is a really important lesson. What you're learning now is useful for now and the few years ahead. But I suspect, particularly if there's students watching this, technology and ways of communicating that have yet to be invented, that will probably be part of the mainstream day in, day out news gathering and news communication in 10 to 20 years' time.
I think while you're embracing all that change, just never forget that the story is king. If it's a good story, it's a good story, and that's the most important thing to your storytelling. You can have all the fancy pictures and the great sound effects and all the music mixing in the world, but remember, great stories from great people and contributors are what it's all about.
I would just say, if you want to be a program editor, it really is one of the best jobs you could hope for in journalism. It's varied, it's interesting, it's fun, it's hard, it's challenging, and you get to work with some of the best people in the business. And so if you're interested in becoming a program editor, I could not recommend it highly enough.
It's a ringside seat to history from the safety of the gallery.
Nice quote.
Nice.
I hope we tweet that one out, John Schofield Trust Supremos behind the scenes. Okay, because we like to hit deadlines, especially as program editors. So we will try and hit our deadlines here. I've just got wanted to say thank you so much to our panelists for giving up your time. As I said, you did give it all up for free. And I just want to remind people that we do, as a charity, try to make this industry inclusive. We're very grateful to Laura, John, Debbie and Richard for giving us such top tips to take away. We are running these masterclasses for free, and do consider donating if you can. As I said before, some people give £20, some people give £5. You can give whatever you want, to be honest with you. We're just very grateful because it helps us offer these events to as many people as need them. And I'm just going to say something else, which I hope that our panelists would love to come along to as well, and listen in that we have another fascinating masterclass coming up in 2 weeks' time on Tuesday, July the 20th. Now, this one is going to be very different. It's a detailed look at ITN's unique coverage of the scandalous state of some of the housing in the UK, which is triggered by pictures of appalling conditions in flats and homes in South London. We did discuss it earlier in the conversation. Now, we're calling it Anatomy of a Story, and we're going to follow the process from start to finish, including hearing from a woman whose experience triggered the whole thing off, the producer who uncovered the story, and ITN's reporter and editor who brought it to air and turned it into a national campaign. So that's on July the 20th. So do look out for more details online and on social media. As I said, we're now coming to the end. We've got 3 minutes. Now, guys, I know you like hitting deadlines. We're encouraging all of those watching to hit a deadline. What is your one key takeaway now as we hit our 3 minutes that they should go away with as a potential program editor in the future?
Creativity and ideas.
Pictures.
Sorry?
Pictures.
Relationships with your team.
Oh, I'm stumped now. Going last.
Debbie, the time's ticking.
Don't be scared. Don't be scared to try something new.
Yeah, so good.
I think that's brilliant advice. You know, and I come as a mid-career journalist. As I said, we've got many people from across the board here. Super grateful that you've given this time up for us, and we've learned so much. Now, one of the reasons I want to hit the deadline is we were talking about football earlier, and the football is coming up. So I hope that you guys all get to watch it, and we figure out whether that's going to be in the news agenda tomorrow. So thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for joining in. And we've just been told, and Love Island. Everybody, Love Island is also coming up, also just as important as the football. So thank you so much for joining in. Everyone who's viewing this, whether it's live or whether it's going to be on a recording afterwards, thank you so much for taking part. And also always suggest ideas for masterclasses and people to hear from. We're always on the lookout. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.